All right, greetings. So this will be our first video lecture, and we'll get started right away with Learning Objective 1. This will be a short video talking about what watersheds mean and defining watershed management. So the definition that I like to use for watersheds is a geographic area in which water, sediments, and dissolved materials drain to a common outlet. So the important thing about watersheds are we're talking about where water comes from and goes, but very much in a spatial context. So the term water, then shed implying some spatial area that sheds off the water or directs the water to some point. So the thing about watersheds is the first thing that you really have to know if you want to define a watershed is what is the point of interest that you care about. For example, in this diagram on this slide, the outlet of this watershed is right here while I'm putting the red dot. And you can see some red lines going up along the topographic divide around that stream network, the blue lines on the map, defining the watershed area. So within this area, if you have rain or snow, and let's see here, and that rain or snow flows downhill to the stream network and contributes to that particular point, that outlet that you've defined, then that's within the watershed area for that point. However, if I want to, say, know what the watershed area is for, say, a second location here, then I would look at the ridges and the divides that define the area where if I had precipitation and it flowed downhill, it would contribute to that point. Outside of this area, we have, say, precipitation. It goes downhill this way and out. Doesn't contribute to either of those points, so it's not within our watershed. So your watershed is going to be defined by whatever location of interest to you, and it can vary spatially. So here's just a couple slides to show you some views of different watersheds. This first picture is from some research watersheds. In this case, they've taken some small tributary headwater streams and they've clear-cut them for research purposes. So they're studying the response down at the bottom of these clear cuts forest management. And so the watershed area follows the ridge lines here and defines that watershed. This land slopes this way, this land slopes that way. So precipitation over here would come down to this outlet. So this would be the watershed area over here. Now I'm drawing that quickly because I know in this image that the clear cuts go, because it was a research context, they go up to the ridges and they stop. So that's the way I'm able to define that. But also if you look at the topography here, you can kind of get some ideas of some ridges and some depressions and so forth that can help you make determinations about what the area is. Alright, so here's a local example. This is some glacial terrain in the Sierra Nevada. We're looking at Half Dome here. So I'm in Yosemite National Park with this image. Down below here we have Tenaya Creek. And then on the other side of Half Dome, over here on this side, we have the main stem of the Merced River. So the ridge that separates whether snow or rain goes to Tenaya Creek or the Merced River essentially is right along this ridge line. So this land slopes this way, this land slopes that way. And so I could map that topographic divide like this for lands that slope different direction. Okay, the ridge moves down So I can come along here and define this ridgeline like that. So anything that has precipitation snow on this side goes toward the Merced River, and this goes toward Tenaya Creek. And in this case, it's really steep and fast, so you'd say, yahoo! If you were going to go skiing. Of course, you probably would die. Anyways, the topographic divide that separates out the difference in the two watersheds. All right, so maybe one final comment before I move into some terminology. Your first homework has a couple videos that you're going to watch, and it's going to help you to practice a little bit on determining watershed area from maps. It's going to have you map out what we call stream orders, and then gets through a process using what I call a flow net. And that's just it's a way to think about or help you internalize trying to determine where this watershed divide is on maps. All right, so a watershed is a geographic area that has water, sediments, dissolved materials that go to a common outlet. You'll see a lot of other terms used for watersheds, and essentially they all mean that exact same definition for a watershed. Probably one of the more common ones that you'll see is the term basin. Usually when we talk about basins, though, usually we're talking about something very big. So this particular image is showing you the Mississippi River Basin with its various sub-basins. Now the Mississippi is huge, hence the term basin applies to it. However, if you look at the Missouri River, well, the Missouri River is a basin in its own right. But in the context of the Mississippi River, it would be a sub-basin of the Mississippi River. And then you could take the Missouri and you could break it up into different watersheds. In this case, you're looking at different watersheds associated with the sub-basin of the Missouri River. However, the terminology could be, if you were calling the Missouri a basin, then the Middle Missouri, the Yellowstone, the Upper Missouri would be sub-basins of the Missouri River Basin. All right, so there's no really set definitions, but the term watershed, sub-watershed, and so forth is within the context and relative to whatever water body area that you're talking about. There's one other term that you'll see, and that is catchment. And essentially that is the word used for watershed, but it's very common to use it. Europeans use it. You might hear it in Australia, other places. I'm not even sure if I spelled Australia right, but nonetheless, catchment, another term. But they all mean watersheds. All right, so why do we manage watersheds? Well, first off, when we talk about watershed, it is a fundamental management unit. We have a spatial context, we have area, we have land, and anything that happens to that land or impacts from that land will affect the water that is in that area. So it makes it a fundamental land management unit. In fact, a lot of management planning that happens for federal lands is done at a watershed scale. EPA works at watershed scales. California water boards work at watershed scales. Because anything that happens to that land will happen to that water body within that land. So why do we manage watersheds? Well, there are going to be a number of things that can affect water. And they can be physical effects from soil erosion or changes in hydrology. There can be chemical changes to water. And ultimately, this can also affect biological changes, human beings, wildlife, and so forth. So, primarily, the reason we manage watersheds is for water quality. And water quality is a function of all of these things. Physical is things like erosion. It is habitat, stream habitat. Chemical can be things like pollutants, but it also can be natural elements. And biological, well, we use water. Humans use them. Wildlife, fish, invertebrates, and so forth. Darn it. All of these factors go into why we manage watersheds. So water quality really is the main reason. A second reason that we manage watersheds is for quantity. Oh my goodness. Sorry about that, having a little bit of technical difficulty. So with quantity, what are we talking about? Well, water is constantly moving, and it's going to be flowing outside of watersheds. So water is always moving and flowing downhill out of watersheds. So oftentimes we need to manage this. And the primary way that you probably can think about is through reservoirs. So through reservoirs, we can actually stop that movement of water. We can store it and then use it for a different time period. So quantity and the timing of water is something that we oftentimes manage watersheds for. This also can be associated with flooding and flood control. If you have a very large snowmelt event or precipitation event that's going to cause downstream flooding, you may have reservoirs that stop that wave, that large amount of water, and then release it out at a different time to diminish the downstream effects from the water. So we manage watersheds for quality and quantity. All right, so that's going to be the function of most of our class. We're going to talk a lot about water processes, and then the way we're going to talk about management of watersheds is through impacts on water quality and a little bit on quantity, not so much in this class, but primarily water quality.